online for 10.
Hi, can you all hear us?
Okay, we're gonna wait a little to start.
In the meantime, y'all just get comfortable.
Okay, we're gonna start at like 05.
Tell your friends and tell them to get online.
Yeah. Oh, let them know if they come watch this, they might be able to get a special prize. Because we're raffling something out at the end. And the prize is a waterproof speaker. So, really cool.
It's special because it's waterproof.
Yeah, let your friends know. Yeah, we're also going to say this again when we start, but we're going to have a form posted on the event page so that we can account for you into our raffle. Later. We'll post it later.
All right, so it's 9:05, so we'll be getting started then.
Okay. So, hello everyone. Thank you for joining us all tonight, taking your time to join us for this topic. So for starters, we're going to introduce ourselves. I am Mary Chris, a second year at...
And I am Tamara Kala, also second year at UCSD.
And we are the co-education chairs of the Student Alliance Against Trafficking. Oh yeah, and we are the co-education chairs of the Student Alliance Against Trafficking, also known as SAAT of UCSD Circle K. Committee, our objective is to educate and raise awareness on human trafficking, mainly to a collegiate audience. And so the reason why is human trafficking is a highly prevalent issue worldwide, due to its lack of visibility. And the sensitive and taboo nature of this topic often discourages many to bring it into conversation keeping the traffickers and the severity, the situation in the dark. We are speaking today to break down those barriers and bring to light the topic, holding lights in our picture.
All right, so just to give you a brief roadmap of today, sorry about accidentally changing the slide earlier. We'll be discussing, as Mary Chris said, human trafficking. We'll also be focusing specifically on sugar daddies and other possible unhealthy relationships. And we'll close off with how to prevent human trafficking in the first place. So let's jump right into it then. It's a term that you don't really hear that often, or something that maybe you don't necessarily have words to define. It definitely is something that's increased a lot over recent years, and part of why it's increased so much is because it's in the shadows, it's really hidden, and a lot of people just aren't aware that it's happening. All of you. Human trafficking is the exploitation of unconsenting individuals for free or cheap labor through coercion, force, or threats. Forms, it affects a lot of people of different ages and walks of life. People who are especially vulnerable to it include, as well as also immigrants. Immigrants, it can be hard to go to police for help because depending on what your immigration status is, you might not be able to. Children, if you know what systems exist to help you get out. Again, it occurs across all ages, it occurs across all walks of life. The United States is widely believed to not have any human trafficking, but this is actually a really huge center for human trafficking. So again, this is something that can happen under your nose. This is something that you might not be aware of, and a really widespread problem, which brings us to one of our first facts. 21 to 30 million people who are being trafficked. This number isn't exact just because, again, this is so hidden and spread that it's hard to get an exact number of people who are being trafficked. The number was from neverforsale.com, an organization that works to address human trafficking and help victims. It's still increasing, and San Diego is actually the third largest center in America for human trafficking to occur. It's underneath San Francisco and Los Angeles. And I think just last year, I think it was 810 million. Yeah, 810 million was the revenue for human trafficking in San Diego. America can take place as sex trafficking, labor trafficking, forced servitude. Trafficking can get into the system. Even if you think that a company is using ethical labor, they might have forced product somewhere down the line. And unfortunately, human trafficking is a really big problem for kids because the average age at which someone enters trafficking is 12 to 14 years old. Something that only happens to adults or only happens to a niche population. This can affect anyone at any age. And unfortunately, again, numbers are kind of shaky on this one just because, again, it's so widespread to a lot of people that it can be hard to gauge actual numbers. It is, however, well known that a lot of trafficking victims are children and that the average life expectancy after being trafficked is about 7 years. So a lot of people who are trafficked don't even make it to adulthood. This is a serious human rights violation and it is something that you need to be aware of happening. Again, as said earlier, the three most common forms of trafficking are sex trafficking, forced servitude, and labor trafficking. In particular, it's important to note that we're talking specifically about people who were forced to enter or are unable to leave. We're not talking about people who voluntarily entered and can leave anytime they want. A lot of people who are trafficked cannot leave and did not enter by choice. 50% of girls or women who are trafficked end up in sex trafficking, although a lot also end up in forced servitude and labor trafficking. Trafficking is basically anything in the sex industry that, again, involves coercion, force, threats, and an inability to leave. Something like domestic servitude or domestic work is like you're working, but you're not getting paid fairly or you're in unsafe conditions. Companies such as H&M, Forever 21, produce companies, it's actually a lot more widespread than you think. But today we're going to be focusing specifically on the sugar relationship. As Mary Chris touched on earlier, awareness matters because human trafficking thrives off of secrecy and lack of awareness. That's why it's so hard to combat. If you don't know exactly how big the problem is, it can be hard to fight. But thankfully, awareness is one of the best ways to fight trafficking, because if you bring light to the problem, that in and of itself can help prevent the problem from continuing and can help prevent more people from falling victim. So with that, I'm going to hand it over to Mary Chris.
Okay, so next we're going to be talking about the sugar dating relationship, which includes the sugar daddy and mama slash mama, and also the sugar baby. So the two main people in the relationship, the sugar daddy and the sugar baby, or the sugar daddy and mama and the sugar baby. So the person who typically gives for companionship is the sugar daddy, and they're usually someone who are older and more affluent, so they will offer stuff to the sugar baby, which can be monetary or material things such as gifts. Daddy usually offers like money, like for college usually, and the sugar baby is often in need of has financial need. So the relationship works on that dynamic in which the sugar baby takes a sugar daddy slash mama.
Okay.
And so, like I said, the way the relationship works is one person gives the money or gifts, and then the other will, in exchange, give them romantic or sexual favors and slash or sexual favors. And so the way this is often described on like sugar dating relationships is a mutually beneficial arrangement. It's for both sides. However, it doesn't always exactly work in that way. When in the relationship, the sugar daddy or mama will have power over the sugar baby due to the power dynamic. So they have more money, and the baby relies on them for that. So in how they form, so they can form in like a number of ways. One of the most common are websites, or they can find them online or through mutual friends. And so for the relationship to in order to like ensure safety in the relationship, it's important to have a set of guidelines or to have like consent. However, this isn't always clearly set, which is why it's very dangerous to be in one of these kinds of relationships. So which is also why we're talking about them today. And so sorry, we're having
there we go.
Mind.
We're good now. We're good.
Okay. The reason why we wanted to talk about this relationship specifically is because demographics of sugar babies are college students. And so there's even been a term coined for it, which is the tuition babies. So we all know how expensive college can be, and that's exactly how into these sugar relationships. In fact, one of the most used websites for sugar dating explicitly advertises to college students, telling students to join the sugar university to get rid of college debt. However, that is why you should be very careful for these. Sugars manipulate their targets by playing into their vulnerabilities, and one of the greatest vulnerabilities is money. So the sugar relationship is based around that vulnerability of money. And so without like clear guidelines to end the relationship, the arrangement could be easily turned against the sugar baby, and they could trap you into the forms of trafficking that Tamara explained earlier, like sex trafficking or forced labor.
So with that, we're going to start talking about healthy versus unhealthy relationships. This does include some forms of sugar dating, as well as a few other things that you might encounter in your life in college. So many young people, especially young girls, are trafficked through seemingly harmless relationships. Maybe they meet a guy and they think he's this great person who really cares about them, but the next thing they know, they find themselves being trafficked. And even though not all sugar relationships or unhealthy relationships lead to trafficking, unhealthy relationships still are really bad to be in, hence the term unhealthy, and can lead to or increase the likelihood of being trafficked later on. You know how earlier we said there were certain things that can make you more vulnerable to human trafficking? Being in an unstable relationship, emotionally or financially, can be one of those factors that makes you more vulnerable to. Again, while not all unhealthy relationships become trafficking, it is still a good idea to be able to identify and avoid an unhealthy relationship. So there's a lot of things that can make a relationship go bad, but some of them include power dynamics. You've always heard about how relationships need to be on equal ground. It's give and take. So if you notice that one person has more control over the relationship than the other, like one person's to do constantly, pressuring the other person to like speed up the relationship or slow down the relationship, controls the other or feels controlled by the other, then you definitely do have some unhealthy power dynamics going on. Again, this can later lead to trafficking if one person starts to take all the control in the relationship and the other person has none. But again, even if it doesn't necessarily lead to trafficking, that can end up leading to a lot of problematic behavior down the line, such as abuse. Dependency. Now, we're not going to say that you have to be completely independent on your own, because let's be real, that's not how life works. You end up being dependent on one another in a relationship. Completely isolated from other forms of support, such as your friends, your family, support systems out there. And if one person is attempting to take away your independence, and we're not talking about with responsibility, we're talking about they're cutting you off, then there are also some unhealthy relationship red flags going on. About they want to spend more time with you. They're talking about isolating from your friends and your family. We're talking about not having other people to go to for help. These are red flags. Ending the relationship. It's like what we said that distinction for trafficking was. If you can willingly enter and you're treated fairly and you can willingly leave, and you're like the legal age and everything, then it's not trafficking. Same thing goes for relationships. If you're being forced into the relationship, if you're being, or if you're treating the other person unfairly, and if you feel threatened in any way that you can't end the relationship, then there are red flags. Speaking from personal experience, this can actually happen really easily, where you think that you like someone, but then you end up trapped in this relationship that you're afraid to cut off, or you start to notice that there's some unequal balance going on in the relationship. So again, if you feel like even if you went in willingly to the relationship, if you're unable to end it, that can be an unhealthy relationship. There needs to be like, I don't want to say dependence, but maybe codependence. There just needs to be equality in the relationship. So to sum it up, a relationship turns toxic the moment one person is stripped of agency, independence, or well-being. Relationships are supposed to be about yourself and the other person, not just one or the other. So that is something to keep in mind if you're in a relationship. And again, while not all relationships can turn into, well, not all unhealthy relationships turn into human trafficking, vulnerable to human trafficking, and even if you don't end up getting trafficked, an unhealthy relationship is not something you want to be in. So do keep that in mind, not just for relationships that you might enter, but for relationships someone else you know might enter.
Okay, so next we're going to talk about different ways you can identify human trafficking and different warning signs, just for you to keep in mind and to just awareness for what's happening. So there's different things that you can identify as suspicious behavior. So some of the things include not being allowed to make their own decisions. So, for example, if you see someone out out in public and they look like they are being controlled by someone or someone's carefully watching them, that's something you should keep an eye out for. So no form of identification or can't provide it. So for that, like a lot of times in some relationships, identification is taken, so they have no proof or anything. Also, if they seem anxious, afraid of receiving help, so they're often very avoidant and scared to reach out for help because of all the things that the trafficker may hold over them. If they're unwillingly providing labor or service, and so if you see a child who is doing labor or doing any kind of work, that right away is already human trafficking because it is a child labor is human trafficking. So that is something right away that you can point out as human trafficking. All right. So the another thing we'd like to make sure you do well is your internet practices. We live in a world where many people, well, almost everyone uses the internet and has like some form of social media. So it's very important for you to use your social media safely. So some traffickers look for targets on social media and they lure them in through what they see happening on your social media. So they look for areas where they could point out vulnerability within you. So like an example is like story of a girl who she was posting online how she wanted tattoos and her parents wouldn't let her get a tattoo. I saw that and they were offering her tattoos, but that's like an immediate sign of like, do not talk to that person, avoid that person at all costs, because they may lure you into trafficking, or they might take advantage of you. So for safe practices, just avoid showing anything that may show vulnerability, like your emotional instability, or just like wherever you are. Like if you have strangers on Snapchat, don't turn on your Snapchat map because they can find you. Showing like any sign of weakness that the trafficker may see in you because they may hold that over you. So with the signs that we've given you, you can report human trafficking in order to help stop it. So there's the National Human Trafficking Hotline that you may call, 1-888-373-788. There's also many different agencies out that help trafficking. And they provide support for survivors of trafficking as well, in order to get them back on their back into their lives. Another thing you can do, which is help us spread awareness for this topic. So not just like also. So we're doing it in UCSC, but we'd really like it if you could help spread it in your colleges as well, or just anywhere having conversations about the topic. And another thing is to respect sex workers, whether they're trafficked or not. So oftentimes, people who are trafficked or just sex workers cannot get discrimination. So to like respect them and like so that they can find their help and get the help they need.
All right, and with that, we're at the end of our presentation, but we are having some questions and answers right now. So if anyone has any questions, comments? All right, so we do have a question from Naomi. What are some ways in which we can help stop or prevent human trafficking? The best ways to stop it is just to spread awareness about it. This is an organizing, like this, human trafficking is a system that thrives off of people not knowing what it is or where or how it could be happening. This is something that thrives off of people unknowingly buying products that are created from forced labor or for soliciting services of people who are trafficked. Awareness about trafficking, spreading awareness about companies that use human trafficking to source their materials for their products. That can help a lot. And as we mentioned earlier, reporting human trafficking if you find out it's happening is another way to shut it down while it's happening. Again, educate people about risk factors for trafficking. Like, one thing we think we touched on was that if you're traveling, it might be safe to travel like in an area that you know well, or like avoid traveling alone if you can, just because while that doesn't necessarily mean that you're going to get trafficked if you're by yourself, it can make you a little bit more vulnerable to it, just because if you're alone in an area you don't know too well, it is easier to run into someone who turns out to be a shady person. I hope that answered your question. Do you have anything to add, Mary Chris?
Oh, yeah.
Oh, yeah. There's also the national hotline, 1-888-373-7888. Yeah. And that was on the slide earlier. All right.
So someone else also asked, do you have a resource sheet with facts? So we do. And if you would like it, we can post it on the page later. Yeah, so we can post it on the page later for you to see. Also, there's lots of different sources that we're going to have a resource list after this slide. Actually, can you just go?
Yeah.
So we have a list of like links that you can go to for more information on that. The United Office on Drugs and Crime, they have a lot of information about that. And like any of these links are really helpful for information on that.
And as you saw, we use Never for Sale quite a bit. So that one's definitely good stuff. Also, do you have a favorite charity to work with? Generate Hope.
Yeah. So like there's a lot of nations out there working for human trafficking. One of the ones that we're currently working with is Generate Hope. Yeah.
And there are a lot out there.
And they're local to San Diego. Yes. And they work specifically like with sex trafficking survivors. So yeah.
And I would also look into the area where you live to see what agencies exist there. San Jose, and we have a lot of agencies over there that work with human trafficking survivors, specifically in San Jose and the Bay Area. All right. Does anyone have any other questions? Y'all are so positive in the comments section. It's wonderful to see.
Thank you.
You're so friendly. All right. Well.
Okay, so
hold that out for a few more minutes, just because, like,
for any more questions.
Yeah. In case there's any internet lag or anything.
Oh, also just a reminder, we're going to put up the Google response form onto the event page for y'all to sign in and enter for a chance to win a free waterproof speaker.
Quite a special prize indeed.
Yeah. Speaker at the pool. Wow.
Wow. All right. So again, we're holding up for any questions. Oh, here we have one.
We have a question.
Is it true that human trafficking increases during the Super Bowl? Wow, you're so smart. It does unfortunately increase quite a bit during the Super Bowl. So the Super Bowl is actually the
event with the highest incidence of human trafficking in the United States. So on game day, it tends to increase a lot, which is why we're also hosting this just because, you know, the Super Bowl is coming up, and that's something you should keep in mind.
Again, this is something that thrives under your noses when you're not even aware that it's happening. So on Super Bowl night, be aware that trafficking is still happening. It is really widespread. And again, the average age of getting trafficked is 12 to 14 years old. So yeah, people do get affected at young ages, whether you partake in Super Bowl celebrations or not.
Yes.
All right. That was a good question, actually. Whoever that was very aware of things. Do we have any other questions? Why does it increase? So the part of the reason it increases during the Super Bowl is a lot of people are celebrating, so they hit the town to go out and celebrate. In the case of sex trafficking specifically, I'm sure y'all have heard the expression "boys will be boys," which is, you know, it's a really bad expression, but it does describe how a lot of times people will solicit sex workers more during this time. And again, while not all sex workers are trafficked, a lot are. Not to mention, if people are out in public, it can be easier to abduct them or isolate them in any way that can make them more vulnerable to trafficking. So that is one of the reasons it increases a lot on Super Bowl.
Another thing is that on the Super Bowl, a lot of people alcohol, and so one of the risk factors for like increased activities of sex trafficking is like areas with like alcohol. So alcohol will probably make you more likely to make wrong choices, and so that's one of the other reasons.
That's a really good question. Thank you. All right. Do we have any others? But yeah, we hope we answered that question well for you. Again, really smart of y'all to ask these questions. The more awareness you have, the better.
Also, another reminder, that form.
Oh, I guess we have a follow-up question. Is that a question? Yes, it is. Why was this committee formed? Well, why was this committee formed? So Circle K has a lot of... So Circle K is really known for service, and as a result, the McCain Institute reached out to us as part of their campaign. Was it the Blue campaign? Blue campaign. To increase awareness about human trafficking and to help combat it. And again, since San Diego is a hotspot for human trafficking, it was only appropriate that we would host an entire Human Trafficking Awareness Month. Okie dokes. So Julia says, "Thank you. I'm planning on educating my district on the topic." You are sweet. We need to spread this.
Thank you for joining the movement.
Thank you. Wow. All right. So again, we still have some more time, so we'll wait just to see if there's any last-minute stragglers for questions. The bad question. So
also some not so fun facts. California hosts 3 of the biggest hotspots in the US for trafficking, which San Diego is 3rd. Great.